Thank you, Chair. We're live now.
Super. Okay. So hello, everybody. Welcome to this meeting. I'm Councillor Katie Dye. I'm going to be chairing today's meeting. I just want to clarify that while the meeting is being webcast live, it's not being held as a public meeting in accordance with the Local Government Act 1972. And as such, it is a remote consultative meeting of the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. The consultative status means that some of the usual formalities will not take place. It also means that the committee will not be in a position to take any formal decisions. Where necessary, any proposed actions that do require formal ratification will be referred to the next formal public meeting for approval. Can I please remind members to turn your microphones on to mute when you're not speaking and to use your hand raising function to indicate if you would like to speak. So can I start with introductions, please? And we'll do that in alphabetical order. So Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Warfield Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Blackburn.
Councillor David Blackburn, finally in Wortley Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Bowden, has he joined us yet? Doesn't look like it. He informed me that he would possibly be late. Councillor Buckley.
Yes, hello Chair. Councillor Neil Buckley, Old Woodley Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Carlill.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. Councillor Peter Carlill, Carvely and Farsley Ward.
Thank you. Do we have Councillor Garthwaite?
I don't think so, Chair, not yet.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hartbrook.
Hi, Councillor Cummet Hartbrook, Rothwell Ward.
Thank you. And we have Councillor Renshaw, who is substituting for Councillor Hayden today.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Councillor Karen Renshaw from Alston Robin Hood, and I'm substituting for Councillor Hayden.
Thank you. And Councillor Newton, I think, was possibly also late. So we're moving on to Councillor Shazad.
Good afternoon, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Mohammed Shazad from the Morton and Meanwood Ward.
Thank you. Do we have Councillor Thompson?
Not yet, Chair. No, I don't believe I've seen her.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Truswell.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Paul Truswell, Middleton and Belle Isle.
Thank you. Councillor Tudor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor John Tudor, Killingbeck and Seacroft.
Thank you. And Councillor Wadsworth.
Good afternoon, Chair. Councillor Paul Wadsworth, representing Guisden Road and Ward.
Okay, thank you very much. So moving on to officers, do we have Andrew with us?
Yes, Andrew Lingham, Senior Project Manager from the Sustainable Energy and Air Quality team, and I'm deputising for Polly Cook, who's the Chief Officer, but is on leave this week.
Thank you. And do we have Chad?
Chad's actually on annual leave this week.
Okay, all right, thank you. And that moves us on to Rachel.
Rachel Wainwright, I'm Policy Officer for the Sustainable Energy and Air Quality team.
Thank you. And Cassie?
Hi, I'm Cassie Sivapal and I'm the clerk to this committee.
Thank you. And Helen?
Hello, everyone. I'm just supporting the committee today with Cassie.
Thank you. Welcome. And can I also welcome all our guests who are going to be speaking at the open forum and officers who will be presenting reports today. So moving on to item 1, that's apologies for absence. So Cassie, do we have apologies?
We had an apology from Councillor Hayden and she sent her substitute of Councillor Renshaw. That was the only apology that I received ahead of time, yeah.
Okay, and we've also had Polly, who's Chief Officer for Sustainable Energy and Air Quality, apologies as well. Okay, so moving on to declarations of interest. Any members would like to declare any disclosable, pecuniary or other interests? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So let's move on to item 3 then, which is minutes, and they are on page 5 of the documents. So I'm going to go through them page by page, and if there are any comments you'd like to make, please do so. So first one is page 5. Councillor Buckley.
Sorry, apologies. It was actually page 7.
Okay, I'll come back to you then. So page 5, I just have one comment to make really, which is about Clary Ramsden, who came to the community hub, and just to say that work is progressing really well with the community hub, and there were 2 excellent activities that took place at the weekend, which I was really pleased to attend. So on to page 6. Okay, well, just one update from me on the issue of Climate Action Leeds looking for a city centre hub. Work is taking place on that, but there is still no venue identified. Okay, so page 7 then, Councillor Buckley.
Yes, it was just to confirm, I actually wasn't present at the last meeting, but just to mention that where it refers to the big bus chat on the 3rd paragraph down, it refers to bus transport being safe and inclusive and decarbonised. And I thought it was only right to mention, and I've brought this matter up to other opportunities, but going back whenever it was, 4 years or whenever, the former Councillor Blake's agreement with First Bus to supply 284 eco-friendly buses as their part of the bargain, and our part was to provide bus lanes and all the infrastructure, but there have actually been only 189 delivered. So we are 95 short. And I think perhaps it needs referencing in this committee to register that that is still the fact.
Okay, thank you very much. We've noted that, and clearly that'll need looking into. Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just following on from what Neil said, the Infrastructure Investment and Inclusive Growth Scrutiny Board that I chair will actually be devoting the whole of its next meeting next week to an update on our Advancing Bus Services report. Neil is obviously a member of the board, and he will have opportunity to question, together with the rest of us, the bus operators. I think we've got 4 or 5 bus operators attending. So this is one of the issues that we really want to get into their ribs about. So that will be a very, very early opportunity, basically, to take up the points that that Neil has raised.
Excellent. That seems like really good timing. Councillor Carlisle.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, just on that same point again, because Councillor Buckley did raise this at the Transport Committee as well. I'm trying to remember the exact answer, but I think he did get confirmation that First intended to stick to the promise that they've made, but there have been some difficulties in trying to get the number of electric buses that we had due to the manufacturing. So I think, yeah, obviously on Councillor Trustwell's board, we'll be able to go to that in more detail with the operator there. So I think that's a useful place to take it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so that moves us on to page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. Page 12. Page 13. And page 14. Okay, so thank you very much for people's comments on that. So we can agree those minutes and move on to item 4. So item 4 is the Leeds food strategy. I'm going to assume that everybody's read the documents that came with your packs. Now, our focus for today is on the sustainability section, and really what we want to examine are, do we think that we would agree with the sustainability objectives in the strategy, to look at any actions that are going to be part of that section, and link that to anything that we have already been participating in or planning to do so, and do we think that there's anything missing? So I think it's really timely that we've got this item on our agenda today, because the consultation starts today and it runs until the 18th of December. This meeting is going to be formally recorded as a consultation. So I think if we hear from Ellie, who's going to present the report, and then we have Michelle, who is a data scientist who's going to present to us as well. And then we can look to delve into some of the questions following that. Is that okay? Yep. Is that ready to go, Ellie?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a little presentation to go through. So let me see. Can you see that on a full screen? Yep.
We can see it. We can see all the slides. It's not presenting to us as a slideshow. I don't know if that's.
Sorry, excuse me. I haven't, because I'm normally on Teams. Let me see. Like maybe if I unplug from my dual screen, it might work better. Can you see them? Can you not see it in presentation mode?
We can. Yeah, that's better. Yeah. That's perfect. We can see it as a full screen now. Thank you.
Okay. Fab. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm Ellie Salvage, and I work in the Sustainable Energy and Air Quality team. And I'm going to be presenting today on the Leeds Food Strategy, which has already been introduced as yet. It's been launched last week. Actually, it got signed off at Exec Board, and we're launching our official consultation today. And yeah, I'm going to run through it, and then at the end, after we've heard from myself and Michelle, it'd be great to hear any sort of feedback or thoughts you have, and we can feed it into the consultation formulae. So quickly, I'll run through why it is that we've created a food strategy, also how we got to the point we have now. I'll do a really quick run through the whole strategy, but we'll take a focus in on the sustainability and resilience section, as that's the most relevant for this group. And then I'll quickly run through what we have planned for consultation. So the reason why we created a strategy is we hadn't had a city strategy in place, and we wanted to bring together all the work that's already going on in the city, so that we can really kind of maximize the impact of everything that's going on. So we also want to identify maybe where there is lacking work, so identifying the gaps so that we can obviously really push forward work in those areas from now until 2030, which is when we're planning the strategy until. The strategy has 3 themes that link in with the 3 themes of the best city ambition, so net zero, health and well-being, and also inclusive growth. So they have different chapter names for the strategy, but it's along the lines of those 3 themes. It's also really important to sort of, I guess, raise our profile as a city to have our Sustainable Food Places Awards. So we currently have the Bronze Award in Leeds, but we're hoping to this year apply for our silver one, and then up, in the years between 2023 and 2030 to get our gold. So, that just looks good for the city, and also obviously shows that we are doing lots of good work in the area of food. So that's another reason why having a strategy is great. So work on the strategy started in January, where we hosted a launch event with about 100 different stakeholders in attendance. So it was online, and it was really just to let people in the city know that we're starting to do work in this area in Leeds. We also at that event came up with our vision that we've included in the strategy, which is there at the top of the screen. So for Leeds to have a vibrant food economy where everyone can access local, healthy and affordable food that's produced in ways that improve our natural environment and embrace innovation. So we came up with that, and then from there we asked anyone that was at that event if they wanted to get further involved in the progression of the strategy to send over their details and tell us, which of the 3 working areas they're most interested in. From there, we had regular meetings in those 3 groups that were hosted, and so they were chaired by a council representative and also a representative from outside of the council. So for example, we had Kevin from Rethink Food on our health and resilience one, and then on the food security one, we had people from the Food Aid Network. So it was meant to be then, you know, not just a council fully focused group, but also had, you know, representation from other partners in the city that was going to be relevant to. So we built up the strategy until July time, where we had another meeting like the one in January that was open to the wider group of people. And at that meeting, we sort of got early feedback on our objectives and content of the strategy. Then since then, we've been pulling together the final draft that went to exec board last week. And now our draft has been signed off, but we're now going for consultation, and we'll have a final version after consultation in the new year. So the overarching section of our strategy firstly outline what the Leeds Food Strategy is. So in there, we set out our vision and we show how it links into key strategies like the Best City Ambition on a local level, the government food strategy on a more national level. Then we go into why we need Leeds Food Strategy. So that has a foreword from the strategy chairs, which is Councillor Marsha Katung, our food champion, and also Gareth Batty, who is the Fair Share Yorkshire CEO. Here they present the sort of vision for Leeds, but also the challenge and also lots of the work that's going on already in the city in this area. Then we say how the strategy will be delivered. So we're going to have an annual action plan that we're going to be working with our food partnership, Foodwise Leeds. So I don't know how many of you are aware of them, but they'll sort of help us work towards those Sustainable Food Places awards. So we'll be working with them to make sure that we deliver the strategy year on year. And then the section about how it was developed will sort of outline what I outlined on the previous slide, about how we've been working, you know, with lots of different partners to get where we are today. And then finally, we let the public know how they can get involved. So whether that be through the online consultation, just spreading the word verbally, and there are also some face-to-face drop-in sessions if people want to feedback in person, anything from the strategy. And then we also direct them to the Foodwise Leeds website, which has a page about taking action, and we're promoting people to do that too. So I won't focus really on this slide, but I just thought I'd bring them up. You've all had the full document sent round, but we first have our health and wellbeing objectives. It sets the scene on this page about why health and wellbeing is important relating to food. And then we have each objective and underneath some actions that we've committed to as a council, but they are detailed in the full paper that was sent round. We have the same for food security and economy, which is a chapter that is sort of a different wording of inclusive growth. But again, we have the 5 objectives, and underneath each of those, there's about 2 or 3 actions for each in the main document that's sent round. But then our focus really on us for sustainability and resilience chapter. So here we first outline why this is important when it comes to food, and this is maybe the one that for the public might be sort of the newest one, because obviously we know that health and food are very intrinsically linked, but people maybe aren't so aware of the carbon impact and how different foods can impact the planet. So we first say that, you know, 20% of the UK's carbon footprint is actually from food and the food sector. This might be due to the types of food we're eating. So I'm sure lots of you would be aware that meats like beef obviously are much more carbon intensive than, say, eating a vegetarian meal. So thinking about what types of food we eat, also how those foods are farmed, processed, how they're transported, all these things contribute to a different carbon impact or you know, how sustainable a meal is. And of course, also how we deal with food at the end of its life as well. We also highlight here how climate change is actually affecting food security. So, you know, flooding and droughts, how that can affect how much food we have available, and then how that can also affect pricing as well. So I just thought I'd quickly share this graphic that we have in the strategy as well, which shows the breakdown of the different parts of the food sector that contribute towards that 1/5 of greenhouse gases that I mentioned earlier. Right, so now I'll just go through the 5 objectives for the sustainability section one by one. So if you just, while I'm going through them, you know, have a think, do you think they reflect, you know, they're a good reflection of what we should be doing as a city? Are there any actions that, you know, things are going on in your area that would link them really well? And then at the end, I'll be happy to hear what you have to say. So objective 1 is to empower residents to choose healthy diets by raising awareness of choices that are good for the planet. So underneath this, the kind of actions that we have at the council link into the work that Michelle's going to talk about very shortly around the carbon footprint calculator that the university has developed in partnership with us. So this is a tool that we hope to use in our school meal planning so that we can plan meals to be lower carbon, and also maybe highlight to the children which options are lower carbon, so that we're sort of, starting to introduce that idea and people becoming more familiar with the idea that certain foods are better or worse for the environment. And then also we hope to use that in our council cafes as well, once we've implemented it there. And then generally, the second action is just really around communications to the public to make them more aware of all the things I mentioned earlier around food-related carbon. Our second objective is around tackling food waste, whether it be through reducing, redistributing, or utilising. So again, this would be through communications work so that people are aware of, maybe how they can waste less food, things like that. Also builds on the work to do with redistribution that Fair Share and Rethink Food do, so working with partners to build on that sort of work. And then the final action we have in this section is around expanding food waste collections from the home, but of course with the caveat that it's in, that we have the funding available to do so in line with the Environment Act 2021. And then the community composting initiatives that I mentioned are something that Foodwise Leeds have been implementing across the city. So, if their trials of that go successfully, potentially expanding that if the collections from home are not an option, or until they're an option. The third objective is around championing environmentally sustainable and resilient procurement. So this one is more for the council than, say, residents themselves. So we made our food commitments back in September last year around halving the carbon of food that we buy by 2030, banning air freighted, and also buying things more locally. So, for example, our first action is in line with our food procurement guidelines, which again were noted at Exec Board last week, to make sure that whenever we're renewing contracts or buying, getting new food contracts, making sure that we're following these guidelines to ensure they are sustainable, and we're all following the same rules across the council. And then later down the actions, we're saying about maybe encouraging anchor organisations to do the same thing. So hopefully getting them to sign up to those same sort of commitments that we've signed up to around halving our carbon footprint, and also adopting similar guidelines and things. So trying to be leading by example so that other people like the NHS are doing the same thing in the city. Then the fourth objective, support local farmers to transition to resilient and profitable agriculture, which improves the environment. So this is basically all about farming and growing. So the first point in our actions is to sort of help farmers through lobbying for them. The second one is working with our own planning team and farmers to get the best outcomes for everyone, because we've been working with the National Farmers Union a lot, and that's the point they really came back on. The farmers said that sometimes they struggle. So just making sure that, maybe we can just streamline things to make them as easy as possible for everyone. Third one is basically, as a council, it goes back to the last objective around procurement and making sure that we try and buy more local, more quality produce, and that farmers get a fair price for that. And then the last one is around maybe promoting that outside of us in the city. So being able to get residents and small businesses more linked into local markets so that they can buy food more locally and everyone can be eating food more locally. And then the final objective that we have for the sustainability section is encourage and enable innovative and community-led food production. So this would be promoting potentially community growing initiatives like Incredible Edible and other people like that do things like that in the city, but also promoting maybe to individuals that, saying you could even potentially, if you live in a flat, you might be able to do some growing on your balcony or on a windowsill for herbs. So just to try and promote it across all sorts of applications, so that everyone can have a go. And then the second action on there is maybe a bit bigger scale. So around, I don't know if many of you have heard of the district eating feasibility study that was done, that was planning a greenhouse that was going to be heated by waste heat from the roof. So it's exploring more ideas like that and bigger growing initiatives that are obviously very sustainable. And yeah, there's also things, I don't know if people are aware of Mill Hill Chapel, they have hydroponics in the roof there, and there's a local growing initiative there to grow salad leaves and things like that. So it's really just promoting and trying to grow those areas. So that's all the content. And then we've got the consultation, as mentioned by the chair, has opened today and it's lasting 8 weeks. So it's really great if you have any networks that you can share this with. The strategy is hosted on the Leeds City Council website from today. The online survey is now open. So, you know, we really want to have as many people as possible having a look at it and having their say. So like today, I've brought it to this meeting. There'll be colleagues from public health and financial inclusion team taking it to similar kinds of meetings. And then Foodwise Leeds are also going to be going and doing some public workshops face to face. So I think I've got here some of the points that, you know, Councillor Dye said we would discuss. But I think if we first go to Michelle to sort of show some of the work that I'll just stop sharing that, you know, could happen as part of the strategy.
Thank you, Ellie. That is really, really important work, obviously. Okay, so can we come to you, Michelle? Thank you.
Sorry, can you all see my slides in full screen?
I can see it full screen, Michelle.
Thank you, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me today to show you some of the work we've been up to with Ellie and Polly at the council. So I'm going to present to you on our carbon calculator tool that we've developed. So first of all, yeah, I'm Michelle Morris. I'm an associate professor in nutrition and lifestyle analytics in the School of Medicine at Leeds, and work very closely with the Consumer Data Research Centre. So nutrition and lifestyle analytics, that means I've got a background in nutrition, but I now work predominantly in data science, using a variety of tools to make the most of the data and be able to share it with a wider audience. So the purpose of this work was a collaboration between CDRC and Leeds to support the shared vision of supporting the carbon, of reducing the carbon footprint in the city, you know, as Ellie's just described. And what we really wanted to do was to be able to drive and also support change. And the support part's what's important here, because there are lots of data sources available about the complicated calculations for carbon footprints of food. But how can we actually make that readily accessible to people within the council, people within the communities within the city? And then as researchers, this would allow us an understanding of the carbon footprint of food behaviours in Leeds and how we might be able to kind of monitor and evaluate any changes going forward. So without further ado, I'm going to show you the tool, and I have to confess that I'm going to do this through a PowerPoint slide rather than a live demo, because we've actually got a software engineer working on this today to fix a couple of very small bugs, which didn't actually appear when I was developing the slides. But this is what the carbon calculator looks like. So when you come into the tool, it gives you a little bit of an overview of what's happening, and it encourages you to download a recipe template. So this downloads an Excel file that looks like this, that you can then add in your recipe information. So the ingredients, the name of the recipe type is a field that's used within catering in Leeds City Council, the quantity, units, portions, and location. This is to do with where it's sold. If you need more information, you can click into the About tab here, which explains all of that to you as a user. So back into the tool then, we move on to the second tab at the top, which is Upload Your Menu. And you're presented with this screen. And like with any application, you can browse to the file. And then I've uploaded some demo information, which had 4 recipes in. And when you click on Calculate, it took maybe about 20 seconds to calculate this information. It will then pop up in the right-hand side of the screen in the Your Recipes, the carbon footprint for each of the recipes in the file. So I had 3 school dinner recipes that were all part of a vegetarian grouping: the cheesy bean slice, vegetarian burger in a bun, macaroni cheese, and a vegetable lasagna. In purple here, you can see the greenhouse gas emissions in kilograms of carbon dioxide emitted per serving. And then over here on the right-hand side, you can see the number of servings in each of those recipes because they are created at scale. We also have the total land use and the freshwater withdrawal per serving. And for these 4 recipes here, there was missing data from the national databases, which meant we couldn't calculate that for these recipes. But for many of the other recipes, those would be populated too. And then kind of from a second iteration of this tool, we've added in the calories per serving to support some of the public health colleagues. So you can see that there in the yellow. You can also click and download a copy of this. So you can do that in 3 different formats so that you can then take that away. And that is the same for the ingredients breakdown, which we'll come to in a moment. So you can see there's a second tab on this page, which is the My Menu option. And when you move into that, you have an option to create a daily menu. So you can choose from a drop-down list at the top, the actual recipe that's available and the number of portions that you've got. And it will tell you at the bottom some of the equivalent kind of greenhouse gas emissions and what the lowest emitting ingredient is within your recipe. So back to the main page then, and we move into the next tab, which is the Your Ingredients. This is the bit that the data geek in me really loves. So first of all, you can click to include information from specific suppliers that the council uses. And for example, here, the Hayes Bakery. But within the next tab along, which is the Your Ingredient Matches, you can see what sort of assumptions have been made by the tool in the text matching of the ingredients of your recipe to the large national databases of carbon footprints. And if we go into the assumptions, we've got a nutrition match and also the environmental match on the right-hand side. And you can see that some of these, like for the cheese, cheddar cheese matches the cheddar cheese in both nutrition and environmental match. But you can see that there's some that are not so great, like our canned beans, great in the nutrition match, but not in the environment match. And we wanted this process to be transparent as possible and actually allow the user to be able to tweak this as necessary. So just underneath the assumptions, you can click into changing the assumptions. And the drop-down list here, I've just done it on the nutritional match, but it's just the same in the environmental match on the right, where you can choose the ingredient you want to amend. And then there's a full drop-down list of all the products you could match it to instead at the bottom, and then click apply. And one of the things that our software engineers are doing at the moment is updating this so that the tool actually learns and improves from itself within this option. So on the final tab within there of your products, you can also change the country of origin and the production methods for the foods. This is based on the feedback that we've got. So wherever possible, we've used within these databases, you can choose the different countries that the beef has come from, for example, and we've used what has been fed back from the council catering teams as their most likely options, but these can be amended in here, both in country of origin and the production method. So on our Explore a Recipe tab over here, you can see that we can choose which location the food has been served at. So we've got schools here, but we've also updated this so it can be done at all the council cafes. The recipe type, so the ingredients that I uploaded were for recipes within the vegetarian grouping, and it shows all recipes. So when we then click in to filter the recipes, you can see on the right hand side the breakdown for all those information by actual ingredient type. And then there's a scroll bar within here that will scroll down through all of the different ingredients for those 4 recipes. And again, you can click to download a copy at the top in different formats. So one of the things that we talked to catering teams about was that if they downloaded this information in an Excel format, they could actually look to reconfigure the recipes and re-upload them to the tool and get the new carbon footprint. So for example, if it was a beef lasagna, they could have replaced half the beef with lentils and then run it back through the calculator to look at the impact on the actual recipes when we start looking at the number of servings that are going to each of the schools. So we've got a little bit of further information on a tab across here, and then also some things that convert saffron files. So saffron files is completely new to me, but it's the format of the recipes within the software that the catering teams actually use. And I'm not sure if this is in procurement. And this just allowed them to upload the files kind of in their native type that they use most frequently to make the process even easier for them. So there's a couple of places where we've been using this that Ellie mentioned. So in addition to the work with the calculator that will calculate all the recipe footprints, we also acquired some data on the kind of transactions within schools. So what were most popular choices by the children in 5 schools across Leeds over one term. And using that information combined with the carbon footprints of the meal, we created some lessons for children in schools and this interactive game, which you can all go and play on planetplates.cdrc.ac.uk. And what this does is kind of a top trump style game, which gives you choose from the carbon footprint and the highest and lowest emitting ingredients, and also the popularity. And the popularity is based on those schools. And you can work through 9 different rounds of the game, and it offers you different options that are available within your school. So that was part of lesson 2 plan. The first lesson taught the children through what was a carbon footprint and had them kind of designing their own meals and low carbon pizzas and low carbon menus. And then they get to use the game. And then the other use case that was just published recently is that Foodwise Leeds have been using the calculator to calculate the carbon footprint of all the recipes on their recipe hub. So now you can see the bottom option here is actually the carbon footprint per serving. So it's already being used to help our wider communities consider carbon footprint of their meals when they're choosing, which is what we really want to do with the children in the schools. Not to try and tell them, don't eat high carbon foods, but help them understand that they can make small changes at schools, which can lead to a big impact further down the line when everybody does it. That's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm very happy to take questions, or if you want to follow up later with our team mailbox or directly with myself, please feel free.
Thank you very much. That's hugely important work and absolutely fascinating. Can we open up to questions and comments? Can we specifically direct them to the sustainability aspects of the strategy, please? And can we keep them to the point? Thank you very much. Okay, so Councillor Hartbrook first.
It seems like a really good start, and I think most people would agree that getting appropriate levels of carbon in our diet in terms of reducing in the West is something we all need to do. I'm kind of harking back to the presentation in terms of the overall strategy of objectives around supporting local agriculture and better procurement by buying better, and seeing the ingredients on there. I'm curious as to how finessed it is, because, for example, take something like beef, which is increasingly being demonized as high carbon, bad for the environment. However, if you take something like UK raised beef compared with Brazilian beef raised on intensive pasture, the carbon footprint is massively different. And I'm curious that there's a lot of really, really good stuff kind of both in the overall food strategy and in models like this. But if models like this don't take into account the sourcing and the specifics and go down to a level of granularity, then you're always going to get the same answer, which is basically every dish should be vegetarian, which some people think is valid. I happen to think not, but I think that level of, well, actually beef, lamb that has been farmed in Nidderdale comes with a lower carbon footprint than, for example, lamb that has been intensively farmed, shipped halfway around from New Zealand, for example. I think that's the level of detail that we need to get in to these models to really kind of show. I don't know whether you've factored any of that into your models question.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant question. And when we've been working with children, we've talked very much about local and seasonal, and don't kind of push that message that it necessarily has to be vegetarian. But specifically, the data that we use does include the country of origin of products, so including beef. Off the top of my head, I think we take the national average of kind of imports versus from the UK for beef, for example, But you could see within the drop-down option that I showed you that you could change the country of origin. So if you know that all the beef is British beef, you can go in and update that, and it will use a British beef value. And we actually went one step further in that there is an option, which I didn't actually show you, so sorry about that, where you can upload your own carbon footprint values. So if Leeds City Council managed to get all of their lamb from Nidderdale, and we know that that therefore has an even lower carbon footprint than the generic British lamb would, I mean, it may not make that much difference. You could actually upload that value yourself. And that was something that we kind of built in after kind of feedback with the wider teams. But yeah, we agree it was very important.
Yeah, I agree, because something like, you know, asparagus, which probably doesn't appear on school menus too often, is going to have a very different carbon footprint if it comes from Herefordshire versus Peru.
Absolutely, and hence the seasonal messaging as well.
Thanks.
Thank you. Important question and superb answer. So, Councillor Trustwell next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I hope I don't sound too cynical in my initial comment about having seen strategies produced across a whole range of issues over the last 20, 30, 40 years, but not being followed up with very clear and measurable action plans. I suppose a series of questions. First one is, how do we reconcile some of the conflicting considerations that relate to the food strategy but wider environmental issues? For example, the amount of agricultural and arable land in the past, present and future that is being put forward for solar farms. Because on the one hand, you've got the loss of that agricultural and arable land and the implications for food strategy and other aspects of sustainability. But on the other, you've got the provision of hopefully more affordable energy and certainly more sustainable energy. So how do we reconcile those sorts of factors? Just coming on to the issue of food security, in the initial section on food security, it concentrates quite rightly on getting affordable, nutritious food to people who have got low incomes. But in that section, it doesn't cross-reference the wider issue of food security. That is, this country, this region, achieving as much self-sufficiency in the production of food as possible. I just wondered whether that was a bit of an omission. There is an assertion, I think, within the introduction that indicates that UK farmers will still continue to produce most of the food that we require as a country. What are the figures for that? Because I'm not sure that that's necessarily accurate or true, so I would want some reassurance on that. Going back to Conrad's very valid point about the source of food, and he gave beef, red meat, as an example, but it's not just an issue of where it comes from. Even if it is locally sourced, it's the fact that there's still required a contribution to feeding livestock. And also, and I know we're not going into this because this is a public health issue, the fact that overconsumption of red meat is seen as a major and significant factor in the development of cancers in people. Another question relates to how far we can promote in a local and regional way, maybe with WICA, maybe with partners, the promotion of more food production, references made to it. And I'm conscious that we are, as an authority, very keen on promoting employment in new areas like digital, where I think City is projected we're going to have 30,000 more jobs over the next 10, 20 years. Is there anything we can do to actually promote careers in farming and agriculture and food production? Because, of course, Brexit has caused a major upheaval in terms of current producers being able to actually run their business and sustain their business because of a shortage of staff. And sorry, I'm going on a bit. We'll make this my last point. I think one of the real challenges is going to be engaging the private sector, the private retail sector, not only SMEs, but maybe at a wider level, like supermarkets, to address the sort of issues around procurement, around sourcing, around promoting local agriculture and arable farming. And also, and this is one issue that I think is missing unless I've overlooked it, the issue of overpackaging, because we've gone on about this for many, many years. But as someone who regularly goes into supermarkets to purchase foodstuffs, I still find that lots of retail outlets, especially the major ones, continue to overpackage their food products in particular. So, sorry, Chair, as always, a huge raft of questions. I have got others that I may pick up later, but obviously I'll draw a line there and maybe come in later if there's time.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. So some of those were comments which can be taken that they will be fed back, seeing as this is one of the points of the discussion. But any specific questions you'd like to respond to?
So yeah, I've tried to note down, I probably missed a couple of points, but things around, just a comment around the food security point. You know, so obviously we have the food security and economy chapter, which, as you said, focuses on the aspect of people being able to get food, but it's more in the sustainability and resilience chapter. So it's more that resilience where we're covering that point around, you know, future planning so that we're able to produce food and, you know, and we're not relying on areas of the world where it's a balance to have the right amount of local food, but also if you don't want to produce everything here, because then if something went wrong here, obviously then you wouldn't. But yeah, so that's more covered off in that chapter. And the point around, so you spoke around beef and how it's, you know, it's not just how it's produced, but also obviously the fundamentals of wherever it is, it's still, you know, using the land to feed these animals. Well, we do acknowledge that. And really, we strongly are following the line of like the Eat Well plate. So really, we're not trying to say that everyone should be a vegetarian or a vegan or anything like that. We're going along the lines of the Eat Well plate because that ties in both to the health and well-being chapter and the sustainability one. And really, probably most people eat a lot more meat than's actually on that plate and lots more dairy. So we're kind of going in line with that to be more sustainable and healthy. And then actually, again, the point on the jobs in food production, we are covering that off in the latter section of the you know, in the economy part of the chapter. So, you know, we will say that we want to promote job opportunities, apprenticeships across the food sector. But yeah, we haven't, the thing about packaging I've noted down, that's nothing that's, you know, not been covered in, so I've noted that down. But yeah, I don't know if there's any other particular points that you wanted to point to an answer on. I just scribbling down as you were going through.
Yeah, sorry, I will come back very briefly, Chair. I suppose what I was trying to tease out is examples of, and I think that this was in the list of questions that were posted right at the end of the presentation, what we're currently doing, because I always think that one of the values of a strategy is not only the action plan that flows from it, but giving examples of what is already being done so that people can actually see what that means in practice. And I think that, you know, we do lack the strategy does lack examples about what's already happening, which help to illuminate the sort of work that can be done. But yeah.
So actually, we're on that. So if you go to the live document, that's rather than the paper one that was obviously circulated, on the live one, there is actually links out to some case studies that we've hosted on the Foodwise Leeds website about work that's going on. So for example, the carbon calculator is on there as one of the examples for the sustainability chapter. And then for food security, there's work that went on obviously during the pandemic, the emergency response work. So there's, I think, about 6 or 7 case studies on there to sort of display work that we've already done. But as you say, obviously, the most important thing is the action plan going forward and that we're actually delivering tangible work going forward. And it's not just a document that sits there.
And my one other question, sorry, Chair, was how we plan to engage, if possible, the wider private sector retailers, because that would be a massive move forward. I realise that much of this is predicated on putting our own house in order, but if we can engage them, that would be a massive step forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. So throughout the process since January, we've been trying to involve as many different partners as possible. And I agree that they are one of the hardest sectors to, you know, get involved, because I guess from them it's sort of a what are they getting in return from it? But we've got, so as I said, the chair is Gareth from FareShare, so they've got good connections in with supermarkets and things like that. So we're going to try and work on those relationships. And also, obviously, we've got our economic development team that are also part of the strategy team, which, you know, look after accounts, you know, the big employers in the city. So we're definitely going to try and promote in that area as much as possible, because, you know, they're really big, important sector to do with food. But I completely agree that they're the hardest to get into, but we will be trying.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 or 3 things, but I'll try to be fairly quick if I can. On page 16 in the introduction, there's a phrase: too many people in Leeds struggle to put good food on the table. And to me, it's a slightly tendentious way of putting it, because it infers and it virtually confirms that it's entirely down to economics. And in fact, if I had a word, I was talking to my wife yesterday about this, and we wrote down parsnips, carrots, turnips, swede, potato, cabbage, pork, including sausages, all those things. She tells me, I don't know, that these things are all cheap, and no doubt the carbon footprint's pretty low as well. And I would imagine that virtually nearly all these things are available locally. So if they're available locally and they're cheap, why can't people access them? And the carbon footprint calculator, who would have known that we would need such a thing? I only hope that Michelle has patented it and she can sell it to the Chinese and the Indians and see what they think about it. Page 17, right at the top. Paradoxically, however, we collectively throw huge amounts of food away. And this has got worse, hasn't it, since the emergence of sell-by dates and best-by dates. And if politicians 30 years ago had kept the noses out and not suggested best-by dates and sell-by dates, we wouldn't be in the position we're in now. This is also referenced on page 32. Page 26. Public sector funding cuts and welfare reform has reduced much of the support available to people in poverty. That seems a pretty firm statement for this kind of report, and I'd like to know which public sector funding cuts, please. Page 28, support inclusive growth within Leeds food economy by supporting retail, food and drink and social entrepreneurs to start up and grow successful businesses. How do you propose to support them? In what way? On page 30, this is reference support to farmers. Actually, that's on the next one. This is methane emissions from livestock. Therefore, we must consider what foods are grown. We? Who is we? Is there going to be some kind of coercion here? And with reference to farmers, page 33, help local farmers get a fair price. Well, I'm sure they're going to be really interested in how you intend to do that, because it's not easy to get a good price, never mind what you might call a fair price. So if I could ask those questions, Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you. So some enormous questions there, some of which are possibly outside the remit of this discussion, because I think we were specifically tasked with looking at the sustainability aspects of it. So I don't know how many of them you are able to address, Ellie. Don't feel under any pressure to address all of them right now.
No, that's fine. So I've noted it down, so I was going to say I can always come back and, you know, speak to my colleagues who've worked on the other chapters. But I guess the first point around people struggling to put food on the table, I think, I mean, at this time, there is a cost of living crisis going on, and I mean, not everybody can afford to buy this sort of food. I know there's obviously big uptake in food aid and food pantries and things at this time, and it's not even sometimes the question of being able to buy foods, but whether then people can even pay for the energy to cook the foods that they then purchase. So I think that is a point, I mean, that is valid ever more presently than ever before at the moment. And then, well, your comment around, the food that we throw away. So yes, I guess part of the communications that we can do as part of the strategy can be educating people around the different types of dates, because we don't want people to be eating things past a use by date that could be then a public health risk. However, a best before date, we want to, obviously make people aware that that is something that is just a best before, and it won't be of any danger to you if you eat after that. So that's the sort of things that we actually do want to promote to reduce food waste. The things about welfare reform, I would have to go back and speak to my colleague, as I said, wasn't part of the team that actually built that part of the strategy. And I can't. Oh, we've got the things about you must consider what foods. I don't know. I've got something about considering what foods we eat, but I can't remember what it was, I'm afraid. So I lost.
If I can just make it. Sorry, Chair. I was going to say, if I can make it.
I've lost you now. There we go. Yeah, Councillor Buckley, go on.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to make one comment. I won't go on any further. Two very, very quick comments. How are we going to support the farmers, get a fair price? And comment, if you take something out of the fridge or the pantry, just have a sniff. That's what our grandmothers did, and we can do it. And if it's off, it's off. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've noted those. Thank you. Ellie, if there's anything that you feel that other colleagues would be best to respond to, then please feel free to consult with people and come back out of this meeting. Okay, thank you. So I'm conscious of time.
Sorry, can I just ask a question? I'd like some sort of definition over what a fair price is after all the questions that Councillor Buckley's asked. I'd just like to know what the definition of a fair price is, because what you get on one side of the city as a fair price might be expensive at the other side. So I think there needs to
Do you mean a fair price that people pay for foods?
So we're referring on this end to a fair price for the farmer to receive.
Really? It's how you define a fair price.
I guess it would be to be, a fair price for the farmer to cover what it's actually costing them to produce, so that, you'll see in the supermarket, they will have recently, in the past about, you can pay 10p extra and it gives, a fair price to the farmer. So it might not be on an individual resident level that we're saying that, but as a council, if through our procurement, we can, provide a fair price, and then in our outlets,
in some areas of the city, there's greater pockets of poverty or families in poverty than what there are in other more affluent areas. And I think we need to take that into account as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on because I'm conscious of time. I'm going to take two questions. Councillor Blackburn, in your briefest possible way, can you ask your questions?
I will be very, very brief. It's about, you mentioned it about seasonality. For instance, if I go to local supermarkets, I can get strawberries, right? When I was a youngster, before supermarkets were there, basically you got strawberries at one time a year. Buying something, or for instance, new potatoes, you can get new potatoes in the middle of winter. You only used to be able to buy them because they're imported. So same produce coming from a different source at a different time of year has a larger footprint. And I think what's changed since the expansion at supermarkets is people's aspirations to eat things that are not seasonable. And how are we going to address that?
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. So obviously everyone now has an expectation that you can get whatever you want at any time of year. So it's just around that education. So our first objective is about empowering people to make more sustainable diet choices. It's around, so what are people eating, and being more conscious of seasonality. So if you go to the online consultation, there are some questions on there that ask people, do you consider, the seasonality of something in the supermarket when you buy it? Do you consider where it's from? So we're hoping to get some good data from that, this consultation. So not only are we getting feedback on the strategy, but some information about what people's understanding is currently. And then hopefully we can use that to do communications and to try and, make people aware that maybe, you should, maybe if it's not all the time, but during the week maybe, and then only on a weekend you're going to buy things, a bit more exotic things that have come from further and are not as good to the planet. So that's all part of what we really want to get people aware of.
Perhaps a way is to encourage people to grow more of their own food, and then they know what the season was.
Yeah, 100%, and that's also part of the strategy, growing your own. So yeah, it all sort of links in together, and it's just about people getting more attached to their food and where they're from, and the food that grows where you're from.
Just jumping in, I think that's why the carbon footprint model needs to take into account regionality and seasonality, because I don't know why I picked this recipe, but for example, an Eton mess in the summer has a very different carbon footprint to an Eton mess eaten in November.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Anderson, last comment on this item.
Right, hopefully this is brief. The points I'd make is, one is the potential conflicts in land use in planning terms with housing use and employment use. It's something I think we've got, and we're going to be discussing this later on in the next item. I do think there's a big conflict coming up on the horizon here, how much we use for housing and how much we use for employment use. And then the other one, which was about waste strategy, on page 32, expanding food waste collections. Why are we saying, in line with national policy and dependent on government funding, if we think it's the right thing to do, we should be doing it, irrespective of government policy or government funding? If we think it's the right thing to do to meet the 2030 target, we should be doing it anyway.
Yeah, so on the planning point, I'll leave that, as you said, you're discussing earlier, and you've got planning speaking, but the point around food waste is we've obviously, I didn't just write it, we've obviously done it communicating with all the other departments, and that was the wording that was agreed from the waste management department. Obviously, because if we're putting something out there publicly and we don't have the money to currently do it, we translate, we want to do it as long as we get the funding from national government, but that was a caveat that I had to put in from waste strategy, from the waste team.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to leave it there because we have other items to move on to. Can I just remind people that there is an online survey open, so if you have other comments that you'd like to make or any points, please feel free to complete that. And then the other thing is, Ellie mentioned that this will be an ongoing consultation that's going to be visiting communities. We've certainly invited Foodwise to come to Seacroft and to host a discussion in Seacroft, and I'm sure there'll be opportunities for people to invite the team to their areas too, and then you can have further input as well. So I really would advise you to do that and to share it widely. And can I say a huge thank you to Ellie and Michelle for coming in and presenting on that item. Thank you very much.
I'll post the link to the consultation in the chat as well, everyone. So
that'd be super. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us on to item 5, our open forum. So we've got 2 items, one of which is a pre-recorded presentation, and then we've got Stella who's going to talk to us. So shall we start with the presentation, Rachel?
Yes, I'll just share my screen and load that up for you. Is that visible on everybody's screen?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent.
Hello, good afternoon. I think good afternoon, or if not, good morning. Thanks for allowing me to bring my my question to the Climate Emergency Forum. So I'll start now. Basically, I live in a terraced house in Morley. I want an electric vehicle to contribute to a greener planet and to a local and national targets on air quality and emission cutting. But I have no drive or garage or dedicated parking area. So I feel very frustrated and totally deflated because for years I've been thinking about these, and due to existing policies and regulation, I simply cannot do it. So I feel quite powerless at the moment. If I could have dedicated parking outside my house 6 p.m. to 8 a.m., I could use a charger on the wall of my house with a cable going onto the pavement with a safety lid covering the table. It's not called a lid, it's like a proper thing, like a little step type thing to cover the cable. So I could do that and charge the car during the evening. But I was told that parking regulations do not allow for this. So basically, alternatively, it would be great if the council could install on-street chargers. Some 3 years ago, I even offered to pay for half of the cost of installing one if the council could allocate me dedicated parking opposite my house in the evening. Other drivers could still use the charger during the day, but I was told that parking regulations, again, do not allow this. Maybe the parking regulations need to change in order to facilitate owners of houses like mine without a drive or garage to adopt electric vehicles. If we can park opposite our houses in the evening, with a guarantee that the space will be available, we can charge an electric vehicle. Even if we need to bring a cable from the house, which is not as safe at night as having a proper on-street charger, but it's better than nothing. And we wouldn't take any more parking space than if we parked 2 or 3 houses above or below ours. It's the same thing. Whether I park here or I park there or there, the space I'm taking is the same with regards to the other neighbours also being able to park in my street. I contacted my local MP in Morley, but was totally ignored even after a visit to her local office and several emails. I was even told by council officers afterwards that I don't need on-street charging because the council already is investing in many chargers in public car parks in Morley, where I live. It's great that they are doing this, but this definitely is not a solution for people like me. Definitely not. I would not feel comfortable leaving it to luck and chance whether I was going to find a free charging spot in the evening before I have to set off to work and do the school run in the morning. If that is a solution for everyone who has a terraced house and wants an electric vehicle, then how many chargers would you need in a town like Morley to realistically serve the needs of everyone? Simply, it's not feasible, and it's much more expensive for users like me than charging it at home, because it's different. You have to pay a different tariff, especially if you have solar panels and battery accumulators like more and more people are trying to have in their houses. Not to mention the inconvenience of having to walk maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes to get to a car park if I'm lucky enough to find a free spot with a charger. So the problem will not be solved by chargers in public car parks. It's really good, especially during the day, if people are parking here, they're coming to work or just park to have a bit of fun or to go to the hairdresser, but it's not a solution for residents really in houses like mine, unless we install hundreds or thousands of these in each town centre. But then that would be too expensive. It would be much cheaper for councils to allow residents to have dedicated parking outside their houses, and thus let them buy and install their own chargers, allowing a greater contribution to emission-cutting targets. Could you at least pilot such a solution? Could you think of anything else that's flexible? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Rachel, and thank you for preparing that video for us to look at. I know it's a really important point and one that the council will most definitely need to be working on, and we will prepare a response to you in due course. Thank you very much. So we have Stella, who I hope is still here. Hiya, Stella. Welcome. Would you like to make your submission, please, of no more than 5 minutes?
Yeah. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Dr. Stella Walsh, and I probably need to declare that I'm also a parish councillor of Barwick and Elmet and Scholes. And the issue is very much around the decision making that we're making in the parish council regarding benches within the village. Or the parish, wider than just the village of Scholes. And I've been informed, and this is what I want clarification on, is that Leeds City Council Climate Emergency Committee have advised that all benches in the city should be made from recycled plastic. So I need to declare that I am very anti-recycled plastic and all plastic for packaging, for benches, for anything. and we should be, in terms of sustainability, reducing our reliance on plastic. Recycled plastic is not an alternative, and the United Nations in 2016 clearly said we should be using wood for things like benches because it's the sort of sustainable alternative. So it's really, I would like a response to clarify what Leeds City Council position is about the use of materials for infrastructure. And I know that benches may seem to be a minor thing, but as was said earlier, is the small changes we make can have a larger impact. Thank you. The other thing I'd like to thank you about, I didn't know you were going to do Food Strategy Day, but my background is in food, and I'm a member of the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition and have been for 20 years. So we do the nutrition side, not sustainability. However, I am an allotment holder, so I'm privileged that I do eat seasonably because you have to eat what you grow or give away. And I would like to, so that this is a supplementary question, and I didn't see any mention in any of the food strategy that was presented about allotments. I'm lucky enough to rent my allotment from a private landowner, and therefore it's very cheap. And I know that Leeds City Council allotments are virtually double the price that I pay. So again, could within your food strategy, if you want local producers, you need to protect your allotments, you need to make them accessible, and that means accessible so they're available nearby where you live, but also that they don't cost so much that they prohibit people growing their own food. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. We will consider both of those questions. I know certainly the issue of benches is something that concerns us greatly in my ward too. So we really appreciate that, and we will get a response to you on that issue. In terms of the food strategy, in the chat is a link to the survey, and I strongly advise you to complete that too. Thank you.
Chair, sorry, can I come in on that last question on the food strategy? The allotments are detailed in the food strategy. I think it's paragraph 19 of the food strategy, and talked about management of them and their importance. I can't comment on the fees that are charged, but I'm sorry, I've been very, very poorly, which is why I look like this. But it is, and they're extremely important to us, and the management of them, and encouraging people to grow locally. I'm very lucky in my ward in Temple Newsome that I've got two within walking distance, two council ones within walking distance of my house, very short walking distances. So they're extremely important to us, and they're in there in the strategy. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for attending, Stella. I really appreciate that. Okay, shall we move on then to item 6? I'd like to say a huge thank you to James Rogers for attending today. The idea behind these is that we will be inviting on a rolling programme all of the directors to come to SEAC and to discuss progress made in their directorate towards net zero, and it's James's turn today. So we've got time for some comments from you, James, and then some questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good to be with everybody this afternoon. I've done a short presentation just to talk you through the many things within the directorate that we're doing on this agenda. So let me just see if I can share it, see if the technology works.
While you're doing that, James, can I just ask, is Councillor Hayden there now? Because I'm substituting for her today. Is Councillor Hayden present now?
Yes, Councillor Hayden has recently joined us.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, has the presentation appeared on the screen now?
It has, thank you.
Excellent, great. Okay, that's the first stage done. Okay, so communities, housing environment, just a bit of a sort of introduction in terms of the work that the directorate's doing around contributing to the carbon neutral Leeds 2030 target that we've got. As members will be aware, we provide a very wide range of services which are very public facing. So we collect people's bins, we provide social housing, we manage the councils or the city's green spaces, we deliver safe communities, we help people claim benefits,
and we help things like the elections run smoothly in the city. So with all of that, we're a very visible directorate, interacting with the city citizens every day. As you might imagine, a number of our services are highly dependent and reliant upon equipment and plant, whereas others rely upon more processing of data and things of that nature. But I think all of them have a big contribution to make to the carbon neutral agenda that we've got as a city. And I'm just going to talk you through each particular team very quickly, just to give you a bit of a flavour of the things that are done within each particular team. So the first team is the Safer, Stronger Communities team. So I think the key thing to focus on here is the fact that they're responsible for the city's community centres. A lot of work being done to make those buildings more energy efficient, LED lighting being installed, along with upgrades to heating systems, all of which will see a reduction in emissions within those buildings. We are carrying out a full programme of condition surveys currently, which will enable us to better understand all of the measures that can be implemented, such as better insulation, to make community centres as energy efficient as they can be. The Safer, Stronger Communities team also has Leeds Watch. Pleased to say that all of the Leeds Watch vehicles are now electric. And the Safe Strong Communities team also supports the council's 10 community committees, which give people a say in local decision making, and they're undertaking quite a bit of work to raise awareness of the climate emergency and support projects, particularly in communities which support zero carbon. Next up is housing. I think it's fair to say that the city's housing stock has a huge role to play in reducing the city's carbon footprint. It's estimated that 26% of the city's carbon emissions come from the city's housing stock. So a huge challenge to reduce emissions from all sectors, whether that be social housing, owner-occupied, or the private rented sector. Early this year, we published a new housing strategy. That's clearly been developed with the goal of carbon zero specifically in mind. We're working with a number of partners across the city to ensure that cities' homes are as energy efficient as they can be, and the significant investment currently taking place in the city's social rented stock to make sure that that's possible. So just as an example, we've currently got a particular scheme, 8.9 million energy efficiency refurbishment programme taking place on 190 flats in the Holt Park estate in northwest Leeds. So that will see reduced carbon emissions thanks to improved heating and water systems. All of that should see those properties moving from an energy performance certificate rated of D down to B, with a reduction in energy consumption by about 70%. So a significant contribution and a return on the investment that's been made. We've also got high rises across the city which are being modernised, and where possible, connecting to the Leeds district heating scheme pipes, which is effectively sort of picking up the heat generated by the RRF, which is the city's waste disposal facility, as members will be aware. In parks, as you would expect, significant work underway. So we've got the city's tree planting scheme that team manage in terms of creating new woodlands. We've got 200 hectares of land which are being improved to give better habitats for pollinators. There are 128 what we call urban buzz hotspots, which are encouraging insects that will turn and pollinate plants. We've got wildflower displays and insect hotels, which do the same thing, and also a relaxed mowing programme on roadside verges, which is also providing insect-friendly habitats. So lots of work, as you would expect, in parks. In terms of elections and regulatory, which I suppose is a little bit more indirect in terms of things that we are doing, but one of the services within that team is taxi and private hire licensing. So in recent years, we've seen 2,700 of the city's 4,900 private hire vehicles become ULEV vehicles. and I think that's a significant achievement. Clearly more to be done on that, but 2,700 out of 4,900 is really positive progress. On elections, each year we have to canvass each household to make sure registers are up to date. Traditionally, that's been done in paper form, but now what we do is seek to hold an email address for households and make contact in that manner to do that canvass, and that saves somewhere in the region of 70,000 registrations forms and envelopes thus far, as well as halving the number of journeys that our canvassers make who were previously visiting houses in the city. And we also use contractors who use green vehicles. We've relocated 50 polling stations, in terms of which were previously mobile, so that's seen a big reduction in the use of HGVs and cranes to site them as well. So lots of indirect work in elections and regulatory. Next up, I've got community hubs and welfare. So like many of our teams across the council, we're looking to reduce commutes and journey times to contribute to reduced emissions across the city. Like elections team, there's a massive push in terms of moving people to online access and away from paper-based services. In terms of the work that we do on community hubs to modernise them and maintain them, we're encouraging contractors to use electric vehicles. We're using timber in the construction, which is from the Forest Stewardship Council approved suppliers, so that'll enable us to make insulation as effective as possible. And all of the waste from hub construction work is sorted to maximise recycling as well. And I think also, in terms of the siting of the hubs themselves out there in communities, encourages them to be accessible to people on foot and bus journeys as well as providing bike racks to encourage sustainable transport. Environmental services, as you would expect, makes a massive contribution to this particular agenda. We are developing a new waste strategy for the city, and I know you had a presentation, I think, on some aspects of this at your last meeting, so I won't go into too much detail. That work is ongoing, although it is impeded somewhat in terms of slow developments of the national waste strategy in government, but we're progressing work there. Members will be aware that we've recently opened Newmarket House, which is a new home for refuse and street cleansing services. So that provides a very modern, future-proofed operational base for the city's refuse and street cleansing services, located next to the Roof. It'll enable us to design more efficient collection routes, and it's also driven down costs in terms of helping us, or it will drive costs in terms of collection of household waste in the city. It's adapted for green fueling options in terms of there currently being in 20 electric charging points installed there. And then we've got a further 22 for other services, fleet of vans that we have. But we've also made it future-proof in terms of having the ability to convert all the bays to either electric, hydrogen or biofuel, depending upon where things go in the future. As members will be aware, the Roof is a massive contributor in terms of the district heating scheme. And the Roof itself, just to put this in context, processed last year 193,000 tonnes of waste. That avoided 41,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions compared to what would have been the case had it been sent to landfill, which is the equivalent of 19,632 vehicles being taken off of the road. And then the final slide is really just about the general work to do across the directorate, working with communities. So because the outward public facing work that we do, it's also an important role that we have to educate and inform communities and residents about the city's ambitious zero carbon target, and how citizens can play a role in helping to meet that. In parks, we do a significant seed collection programme. So using the Leeds Needs Trees banner to encourage local people to drop beech nuts, conkers, sweet chestnuts and acorns across the city. We then sow them at the atrium, and the saplings will then be planted across the city as part of the tree planting scheme that I made earlier. And then finally, in housing, the city's housing advisory panels also provide small grants to local communities for projects that particularly help the environment, such as bulb planting, tree planting, and providing new planters and raised beds, for examples. HAPS, the housing advisory panels also fund better access to communal bin stores, which help residents to recycle better. So that's just a quick run through. It gives you a flavour of the significant work that's done in the Directorate on this agenda, and hopefully my screen has now stopped sharing, and we'll be back and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that hugely important work. I can't see any hands at the moment. Yes, I can now. I can see Councillor Trustwell. Do you want to go first, and then Councillor Hartbrook?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Without going through every page and every single element, just picking out one or two elements of it. And I suppose it's a question of how far some of the objectives and aims of the revised strategy can be mandated, can ultimately be enforced, and how much of it is a process of discussion and encouragement. So I'm thinking, for example, in section 7, carbon reduction, it talks about requiring most new applications. I mean, to be useful to know what the exceptions are, achieve a net zero standard in their operational use, requiring that all major applications calculate the whole life carbon emissions, and requiring that all major developments meet a sustainable construction standard. It would be useful to know how much of that, as I say, is actually enforceable if push comes to shove. And in terms of the sustainable construction standards, is that basically talking about the use of low carbon or no carbon materials? Because yeah, we will recall that we discussed that at our last meeting. In terms of flood risk, it indicates that there's a strengthening of the examination of flood risk, and that the policy may lead to new developments in vulnerable areas being refused. I mean, have we any examples of that under the old system? And I suppose one of the other issues, coming back to another matter that's exercised members, is the use of permeable or non-permeable materials for driveways and parking places, both for new developments and existing ones. And I suppose my final question, and this is a bit of a how long is a piece of string, we obviously had an announcement that there were going to be further relaxations and liberalisations of planning regulations, which I think we all hope will go the same way as the Prime Minister who advocated them. But if there is a change, would that require another revisiting of the strategy to rewrite it in the context of those new requirements?
Can I just ask you, Councillor Trustwell, to save those questions for the next item, because I'm pretty sure that you meant for them to come in on item 7.
Oh yes, I did.
So if
I jumped ahead of myself, I suppose,
yeah,
because I've only got limited time like everybody else.
yeah, can you hang on to them? It would be great if Martin heard them, because then we could go straight to them after the item.
I am really sorry, Chair. I didn't spot that there wasn't any paper relating to that agenda item 6. So mea culpa.
No problem. We'll come back to you. Let's go to Councillor Hartbrook.
I've just got 3 points. One slightly mischievous, one which is a genuine gripe, and one which builds on something really positive that was said earlier that I'd like to expand on if possible. One, I noticed, James, thanks for that, really good presentation. I noticed you mentioned that we're putting 20 EV chargers in at the facility, which I fully understand the logic behind. But can I just point out that at a city level, taking into account the presentation we had from a member of the public earlier on, who was expressing frustration how difficult it is for people without driveways to get charges, that we are at risk of creating a 2-tier city where we put in facilities that some can access, but don't put in facilities that all can access. Curbside charging is a big issue. So I fully understand the need for 20 to charge our EV fleet. But yeah, I can understand that will create frustration at a residents level who doesn't have that liberty. Second one, you were saying that basically on the food waste strategy, I've been a councillor for 18 months and it's barely moved on. It's going at a snail's pace. We really do need to pick it up. And I get that we're waiting on a national strategy. However, although the national strategy isn't out, the science behind that will underpin that is absolutely crystal clear. And cities like Leeds will at some point need food waste collection and food processing and biogas and all those things. And I understand and accept, probably reluctantly given the current economic situation, why we can't invest in building those things necessarily now, unless we can get some private funding or some other funding or a partner somehow. But I would expect us to have a draft strategy that identifies where those shovel-ready projects will be, so that as we the money becomes available, we can be at the front of the queue out of all the cities that are going to be bidding for this and know what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and who we're going to do it with. And I'd like a commitment from, I guess, yourself and your team to get some timings around that, to see that and to understand that we can do that. Thirdly, and the final point, it was mentioned in the earlier presentation about tomatoes and the linking that up to the RERF and growth. And that's a fantastic thing. And I think I've wondered why we've not done that as a city before, because if you go to your supermarket, you will see that most of the tomatoes, or many of the tomatoes that you buy, come from Holland, a country not famed for its fantastic weather. However, what they do is they harvest the heat and the carbon dioxide that comes out of their various industrial processes from incineration and others to capture that CO2 in tomatoes and sell them to the British. So I can think of nothing better that we could do as a city in many ways in terms of food security and regionality than putting in some, basically having Yorkshire tomatoes grown on the doorstep of Leeds. Thank you.
Thank you for those. Do you want to respond, James, please?
Yeah, no, I can do by all means. So I respond to the three issue. I think it's a fair point that's been made in terms of residential charge, and I think a number of us across the council have a role to play in that. So we, for one, in terms of our work in sort of taxing private hire licensing, car parking, will do our bit. So we're working currently looking to install 88 charging points across the city, which is related to the work that we're doing taxi licensing and private hire. We're also 26 free-to-use charges within car parks across the city. I think much more is needed as you look into the future, and I think discussions with highways colleagues and other colleagues will be needed to do much more on that. I really do understand the issues around a desire to get some clarity on the city's waste strategy, and we are actively working on that in terms of bringing forward ideas and thoughts for members in terms of how we take that forward. I don't want to use the national sort of slow pace of developing the national waste strategy as an excuse, but it is a key factor, because that's where funding will come from to help us do many of the big things that we do. So we can do things locally, but they might be impacted upon the current financial challenges that we have, and you've referenced. And in terms of the tomatoes, well, that's the first I've heard of that one. So I think one for us to take away and do a bit of work on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions for James? Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come in on that, that's the district heating scheme that we've done a feasibility that was mentioned at a previous. So sorry, James, that you don't know about the fact that we're going to hoping to use the heat that comes back to the RERF to build, there's feasibility done on building greenhouses there, which will be on the border, or if not in my ward, and it's called district heating. So there's been a feasibility study on that, and why we haven't done it before, well, we didn't have the RERF before, so and it's that's really on the EV charging. Polly's not here today. She's but she is working very, very closely with Gary Bartlett in highways. There is a national strategy coming out. I've actually been at a conference with the civil servant who's working on that. Given the mess that the government's been in for the last few weeks, obviously that hasn't come out yet. So we'll have a look at that. But Leeds is seen as actually very far in the front in terms of EV charging. What I will say in terms of that, yes, I live in a terrace house. It's very difficult for people in properties like this, but on-street charging will be extremely difficult. And our lampposts, because they're set too far back from the road, are not conducive. And I know the gentleman talked about putting a safety thing. There's still a trip hazard to people who are blind, wheelchairs, that sort of thing. It's very dangerous and very inconvenient to have things across the footpath. And when we're wanting to encourage people to walk more, there's going to be 300 across the region with WICA are doing. Then there's the work that James talked about. There's also the gentleman in the video talked about in terms of local centres. So, but Polly can come back with the EV charging work that she's been doing with Gary in highways. But we are waiting on the national strategy for that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden, and I'm sure that is something that we will most definitely be revisiting in the future. Okay, so in the absence of any more questions for James, can I just say a huge thank you for coming. Clearly your director is going to be enormously important in our journey to net zero, particularly housing. So it's not the end of the conversation. I think it's most certainly the beginning, but we really welcome your input. Thank you very much for attending.
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so that moves us on to item 7. Thank you, Martin, for your patience in waiting to talk to us. We're going to yet again assume that people have read the documents in the pack, and the point of this presentation is because it's the beginning of a consultation, and we're asked to note Martin's comments and comment on them. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Can people see the full screen slideshow there?
Almost. Do you need to do the thing where the display settings where you swap?
I might need to. Yeah, just bear with me one sec. Let me just pull out my second screen, and that might help. Is that better?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, many thanks. So members have seen this material a number of times before, both in the main SEAC meetings, but also through the workshops, and for those who sit on development plan panel. But I'm just going to go through it again, just in summary, just so that we're clear as to what the local plan update is about and what it includes. We're at the stage now where today is the first day of consultation on draft policies within the local plan update. And that consists of amendments to 19 existing policies that we've got within the plan and 16 new ones focused on climate emergency, enhancing biodiversity, and improving health and well-being. We are at a sort of midpoint of the timeline, having gathered evidence, been out for initial consultation last year and considered the responses to that and drafted the policies. As we edge to the next box, which is publishing our report of consultation after this round, we can actually start attaching some weight to these policies, but that does depend on the amount of objection that they receive. So we'll have to clarify that as we move through the process. The policies then, quickly going through, I think the first thing, which I'm really pleased to see, is a strategic policy that sits at the front of the core strategy. This is responsive to the climate emergency, the big conversation that we had in Leeds as a result of that emergency, but also the Leeds Climate Commission's roadmap to 2030 and 2050. And that clarifies those targets that we need to hit within the city. And the reason for those targets is around our carbon budget. Our carbon budget currently used around 4 million tonnes of carbon a year. We need to get that right down to nearer 1 million tonnes of carbon a year. And the role of the planning system has to play in that is relatively important, particularly as it relates to buildings and transport. It's 5 topics in total. The first is carbon reduction. I think members have already mentioned whole life cycle carbon assessments today. This is a very new thing for the Leeds plan to start to engage with, and we'll be looking for developers to start to assess where their materials come from and the sorts of decisions that they take when they're constructing in Leeds. We're not currently going to use that policy to refuse planning permission. We can't, because we just don't have the evidence to suggest that there are sufficient materials around there to deliver the development Leeds needs. But what it will enable us to do is start to monitor what whole life cycle carbon assessments look like, so that at some point in the future we can actually start to make more stringent policy. All development in Leeds, according to policy EM1B there, will be operationally net zero. Now that's very important. That goes beyond current government building regulations, but we think we can achieve that in Leeds by using passive design, on-site renewables, and also an energy use intensity target regime, which is reasonably technical, but does actually not only result in new development that's going to be net zero, but new development that's going to be cheaper to heat and cheaper to power. We've also got policies about the quality of development, so we're upping our BREEAM requirements for commercial developments to an outstanding rating. They're currently excellent, and we're also requiring all development to meet a BRE quality home mark standard as well. We're continuing to support connections to Leeds pipes, and also including policies around renewable energy generation. We've estimated how much potential there is within the city. We've looked at opportunity areas for wind and solar, and provided criteria guidance around other forms of energy as well. We're also looking at flood risk, a range of policies there to reduce susceptibility to flooding within the city, both within those areas that flood most often, the functional floodplain, particularly in the inner area in the city centre along the main River Aire, but also looking at the impacts of climate change scenarios on future flood risk as well, and making developers take that into account now, rather than when that gets written into Environment Agency flood maps in the future. A few things to consider there, but I'll pull out as well the fact that we're also looking at managing water better on sites by a hierarchy of water discharge, and also really encouraging developers to make space for water within new developments through sustainable drainage. The third big topic is green and blue infrastructure, and within this we're really providing clearer policies and more robust policies on protecting and enhancing green and blue infrastructure assets, from ponds, rivers, culverts, right the way through to incidental green spaces and trees that we find within our local areas. That's important because they all play a role in helping to provide biodiversity, but also in terms of helping to reduce the heat impacts of hotter summers and drought events within the city. So developers will be required to complete a green and blue infrastructure assessment when they submit planning applications that should provide a justification for how they're dealing with those assets, retaining them where possible, but actually also maybe looking at making improvements elsewhere within the city to join up our green and blue infrastructure. There's going to be new policies around green spaces, which really support their role as multifunctional spaces, not just for recreation, but also for biodiversity and health and well-being, as well as a policy on community food growing and improvements to Leeds' habitat network. And habitats are very important to this plan update, because we've also got policy there on the 10% biodiversity net gain, what that means in Leeds and how that should be rolled out, as well as new policies on protecting trees. And if, because ultimately this plan is about sustainable development, so development does still have to happen. If in the progress of that development, there are trees that are being lost. The replacement to those trees will be based on carbon sequestration values rather than simply
I think we've lost you there, Martin.
And how that should ensure things like wider determinants of health being supported, such as through air quality and green spaces, and how that should be taken into account through an assessment on new development. And we're also embedding a new principle in Leeds, which is around 20-minute neighbourhoods. This is a concept which is fairly new within the UK, but it builds on our existing policies around accessibility, requiring that new development aims to be a sort of a 10-minute walk to key facilities and 10 minutes back. And that's kind of what those sort of heat maps around 20-minute neighbourhoods look like. The final topic is around sustainable infrastructure. The Leeds Climate Commission notes that it's not just new developments and new buildings that can reduce our impact on our carbon budget. It's also how we travel. Mass transit's really important to that. So we've got strategic policies there to support new mass transit networks and new railway infrastructure within the city, as well as improvements to Leeds Station. And finally, as a means of responding to what we all faced during lockdown, but also trying to discourage unnecessary travel, a better digital connectivity for residential and commercial developments, which ensures that that connectivity that we're all now taking for granted is really robust within new development. So that consultation starts today for 8 weeks, finishing on the 19th of December. And we are encouraging many different parts of the city and many different groups to engage with that. So I'll stop there and take any questions.
Thank you very much, Martin. Really enjoyed that presentation and clearly hugely important work. I'm going to go to Councillor Trustwell first, who has a series of questions. I don't know if
Chair,
perhaps you might want to just go through them again, Paul.
Right, well, very indulgent, Chair. I really apologise, but my broadband is fluctuating massively, which is why you can't appreciate my aging features on screen. I suppose basically it was about how far we can enforce some of these aspirations. And Martin has already made reference to the fact that some of it's very much in its infancy, like the whole life carbon monitoring, and that we can't really mandate that. But some of the other elements, for example, the achieving net standards in operational use, presumably that's something that developers have to be able to demonstrate up front. If and when they do, are we able to retrospectively monitor that once the developments are up and running? And I think Martin's already answered in his introduction the issue about using sustainable materials, and clearly that's something that is again aspirational. I suppose one of the points I'm making, Chair, at the risk of banging on, is that if the average member of the public reads these documents, they are led to believe that we probably have greater powers to enforce elements around sustainability than we actually do. And I think it's important that we make it clear the limitations that we've got. And I suppose the only other two elements of it, one is the use of impermeable or non-permeable surfacing for hard standing car parking, both at present and in future, and how far we can enforce that. And it would be useful to have a little bit more information, I think, on the food resilience element of the policy F1, obviously in the context of the discussion that took place earlier. So thanks very much for being so indulgent, Chair.
No problem at all. Thank you. Martin, did you want to come back on some of those points?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Chair. There was one other point very quickly. If there were any relaxation or liberalisation of the planning regulations, as has been talked about over the last 6 weeks, I think it was, would that require some sort of revamp of the process that we're going through?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Trustwell. Thanks, Chair. So just, I think the question about enforcement's really important. What these policies do is they set out what Leeds means by sustainable development, and they set out what Leeds means by the kind of the environmental bit of that. And national guidance tells us that we should deliver sustainable development, and it tells us that we should look for mutually exclusive ways of doing that. And I think we've worked really hard to write these policies so that they're not massively off-putting to the development industry. And we're seeing net gains, we're seeing win-wins when they come through. So for example, all the policies around trees, green space, green infrastructure, when you look at a new development that's being marketed on a developer's website, they'll always lead with the green. They'll always show how market oriented these developments are because they're green. So we're talking into that type of debate. We're asking developers also to do something which we've assessed as being viable. And I know that in Councillor Trustwell's scrutiny group, we've often discussed viability as a bit of an impediment to bringing forth good policies. In these instances, we've done that independent work and we've assessed that they are viable. That will still be a factor within our examination. So I'm not taking for granted that that's going to be easy, but we'll have that debate. Just on the monitoring, I think that's a really important part, and we will seek to ensure through sort of post-occupancy, more post-occupancy monitoring, that these policies are actually being put in place. But we'll also seek to work closely with developers who are doing this well, so that when they come to us with products and we know they're okay and we know they're in line with the policies, they'll get a speedier time through the planning application process, which will be in their best interest. Just in terms of the permeability issue, Water 8, policy Water 8 is where we're setting out our approach to permeable surfaces. So happy for Councillor Trustwell to come back to me with any detailed questions on that, but it is in there. On food, we are looking at making more space for food growing within our green infrastructure and our green spaces. We're recognising that community food growing actually should be a part of new places. So where we're getting strategic new development coming through, we're asking developers to look at the potential for food growing, but also, even if that's not happening routinely, we're also asking for fruit trees and more fruit trees to be planted within new developments as part of that. On the liberalisation of planning, I think it's fair to say that there has been some considerable change nationally. And I think if we were to listen to all the kind of proposed change that might occur, we might not do any planning at all. And actually government's message is to get on with your plans. So we'll wait and see what happens through the through the changes to planning guidance and through the prospective levelling up bill. But for now, all of these policies are in line with national guidance.
Thank you for that. Councillor Trustwell, did you want to pick up on any of those? Are you happy with those answers?
Just very quickly, an issue that I raised when we're talking about a food strategy, where there are conflicting objectives between, for example, the use of agricultural land for food growing or for foodstuffs, and applications for things like solar farms, which clearly have the sustainability element of renewable sources. How would we reconcile those two conflicting elements?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a really important question, and we'd have to do that on a site-by-site, application-by-application basis, looking at the best and most versatile agricultural land within the city. We don't have objective need assessments for the amount of land that we need to have in agricultural activity, but neither do we have targets set for renewable energy generation within the authority. We know what the potential is, and we'll seek to maximise that potential. But I think that won't be necessarily at the expense of the best and most versatile agricultural land.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Just quickly, the consultation starts today, Martin. When are you sending the information out to elected members explaining what the consultation process is and where there will be consultation events locally?
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. So you should have had your email today. I think it went out just before lunchtime, which sets out the consultation arrangements and gives you the links to the website. And on that website, there are, I think it's 5 or 6 current drop-in sessions that have been set, as well as some webinars that we're running. I should also say that as part of that consultation, we're also hoping to piggyback on other events that are going on within local areas. So if you know of an event that's going on, please let us know, and we'll try and be there.
Okay. Can I ask, has any member had that email? Because I've certainly not.
I'm just looking through my emails, and I don't think I have either.
It should have come from Vashula Bodiat. If you haven't had it yet,
sorry.
Well, it should land at some point today.
No, I've not had it yet.
So I'll chase it as soon as I've finished on this call.
Otherwise, I would never have asked the question. If you'd sent it, I wouldn't have needed to ask the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Anderson and Martin. Yes, I'm fairly sure that's yet to be sent, but I look forward to receiving it. Thank you. Okay, so Councillor Blackburn.
I was going to actually ask sort of similar question to Barry, but we've got the answer to that now. But I'll just say a welcome opportunity to take part in this consultation. It's nice as a member who sits on city plans of us looking like we're going to take things forward. I know it takes a long time to do things, but to actually get our policies, our local policies, up with our policy on climate change would be a nice thing to do. As I say, the difficulty, central government are far behind us, but anyway, as I say, I welcome it.
Thank you very much. So that brings us on to Councillor Carlile.
Thank you, Chair. It was a comment actually similar to David's. As a member of the City Plans panel, and obviously as all of us local board members that see planning applications come in our area, I'm really looking forward to these new policies coming through. So I just want to say thanks to Martin and all the team that have been working on this. We've had the workshops through Development Plans panel that I sit on, but some of these are, I think, quite groundbreaking policies in terms of things we've wanted to do before. Being able to weigh a development up by its operational carbon use is something that we've wanted to do. I won't bring up some of the more controversial planning applications that we've seen on City Plans panel and the discussions we've had around those, because people who, well, I was going to say people who have trouble getting to sleep could watch them, but I think they probably go on for longer than most of us would spend for a night. But I'm really looking forward to these. The policies around the carbon reduction, the fact that they're linked specifically to our carbon budget, so we can quantify that as something we need to be, I think is really important. Just a quick addition to some of Councillor Trustwell's comments, actually, I've seen there's quite a lot of evidence around combining farming and solar panels that's coming out at the moment. And there's a project, I think I saw a news story about in France, them looking at putting solar panels over the top of some of their growing crops. And I was thinking, well, you need to force your rhubarb, don't you? So maybe the rhubarb triangle could be covered in solar panels, and that might help force it for a period of time when you don't want the sun on it. But I think that's something. But yeah, what's in here around protection of various green spaces, around the new policy in terms of trees, that I think brings it in line with the data rather than the numbers that we'd set, and really quantifies that, are really important. And those parts about achieving well-designed places, and this goes in line with the new transport strategy and the transport SPD that came out. So I think it's going to be quite revolutionary. I would say if people can support it in the any comments they want to put in the consultation, those that are watching, that would be very welcome. They are very technical policies, but for anyone that wants to go into depth about them, that would be really welcome to come through, and we'll just find out where we get to at a point where this goes to the Secretary of State, and to see whether we can use it as live planning policy or not.
Thank you. Thanks for those comments. Councillor Hayden.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. And in fact, there is a real demand on our land for all various types of uses, and Councillor Trussell raises a really important point. However, we are looking at land that cannot be used for housing and cannot be used for agriculture, contaminated land for solar farms, to provide Leeds City Council's energy use. So we are actively looking at that, and that's the type of land that we should be using for things like solar farms that can't be used for productively for food and or housing, and isn't in the green belt, which is a bit of a tall order sometimes when you've got limited land supply. I just want to echo Councillor Carlisle about the huge amount of work that's gone into this, to thank Martin and his team, and everyone who took part in the initial consultation, and encourage people to take part in this final consultation now, and the work that they're doing around consultation involving our children and young people, and all various different groups that don't normally kind of engage in planning or planning issues in like this, and it again, as Councillor Carlisle said, if this is innovative, it is far ahead of probably anywhere else in the country, and really quite groundbreaking, to excuse the pun, when you're talking about planning. So a huge, I'm really proud of the team, and for all my colleagues sitting on plans panels and development plans panels, for all the input and support they've given this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hartbrook.
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. I'd just like to pick up on what Councillor Carlisle said around solar panels in Carlton. Just to reassure that I don't think we'd be wanting sort of solar panels kind of covering prime agricultural land, which I realise Councillor Hayden went on to say, but I realise it was a kind of a slightly off the cuff, kind of thinking on his feet kind of comment rather than policy. And Councillor Hayden's right. We should have solar panels only on land where we can't be growing produce, already. And I think some of the incentives that come from central government have created a bit of a perverse incentive where, to be quite frank, it's easier to grow electricity than it is to grow carrots. But we are a small island with a shortage of good agricultural land and a shortage of grazing land, and that should be the first and foremost use of land, rather than kind of sticking solar panels on it. That said, examples like covering the landfill site at Cross Green with solar panels, it's absolutely the right thing to do. So it's just horses for courses. And the one thing we do have a lot of in the UK is roofs, and that is the ideal place to stick solar panels because they're there anyway.
Thank you.
Chair, can I just?
Hayden?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry for interrupting. One thing I would say, we are looking at the roofs that we own as well. One thing I will say is that we as a council are looking at land that can't be used for other things. Unfortunately, as you say, the directive from government, if people own land and if farmers own land and want to use it for, obviously have to go through the planning system, but we can't force them to use it for agricultural use. It's only land that we use, that we own, that we, have got that policy power, if you will. So yeah, it's thank you for those comments, because it is really tricky when you're trying to get land use right, when you have got a shortage of land and lots of needs for it as well. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Is there anything you wanted to add, Martin, following the comments that you've heard?
No, that was very, 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 very positive. Thank you, members and Chair. Just to say that as you're reading the documentation, it can be fairly technical. We've tried to summarise it, but if you do have any issues with it, then do please give me or any of my colleagues a call. And if you do want us to come out and talk to you or any of your local groups in more detail, then do ask.
Thank you, Martin. I'm sure we all welcome that invitation. I really appreciate that. And can I just say your takeaway really from the meeting ought to be that people are hugely supportive of this. I think it could be a massive step forward for the city and really exciting work. So thank you for all your work on this and thank you for coming to talk to us today. Okay, so that brings us to date and time of next meeting, which is Monday, the 28th of November at 1 p.m. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions. Thank you for all the questions and to everybody who's presented to us today. And I will now draw the meeting to a close.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.